Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
I am well. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You're joining us at episode 196. We've got a great program planned for you today. 3 special topics, starting with a student check-in, where we're bringing an interview with a real-life student, just like you, if you're a student on your journey. Rory spoke with Ruth Watson, and the big takeaway there is the change, the transformation that happens during a counselling journey when you are a student. We then go into focus on supervision, where we're going to be looking at self-care in supervision from the perspective of the supervisor, working with the supervisee, ensuring that sufficient care has been taken for the supervisee to look after their own well-being. And then we end episode 196 with practice matters. And today, a really special one. We have Professor Mick Cooper. Rory met up with Professor Mick Cooper, and he's going to be guiding us through some goals in therapy. So something for everybody there. But I think, Rory, we need to acknowledge that if you're listening to this in real time, we are at the end of our current season as we approach the academic break.
Yes, absolutely. It's time to put on our sunglasses, put on our sunscreen, and look at that big yellow globe in the sky, which is the sun, which does make 1 or 2 appearances in the UK from time to time in between the rain and the clouds. But yes, it is the final episode in the season, and it's been a really interesting season, Ken. And certainly we have seen a step change in the way that therapy is delivered, with the development and the coming of age, I think, of online counselling and supervision.
Well, that's certainly been a main focus for us over this last season. So our season spans September through to around about late July, that we run to the academic year. So if you're listening in real time, you'll be coming to the end of the academic journey. And we look back and we realize that we've had over 500,000 downloads of the Counselling Tutor Podcast just in this last season. So I just wanted to personally say thank you to all of our listeners for lending us your ears. Looking over that is really literally hundreds of thousands of hours of CPD that can be claimed, because you can claim CPD from listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And over the year, we've covered 3 topics in each episode, so many different topics. We've had a very big focus on that digital counselling revolution that is taking place right now. In fact, putting a special slot into every episode in service of counsellors, fellow counsellors that found themselves in a difficult position, not being able to be in face-to-face practice. And of course, we brought in the new topic in our Practice Matters section, where we brought in top experts who had delivered lectures in our Counsellor CPD library, also to kind of bring a new flavour to the podcast. And today is no exception. You'll be hearing from Professor Mick Cooper in that slot today. And of course, during this past year, we welcomed the BACP and the National Counselling Society, who came and answered your questions. So it has been a wonderful journey from myself, from Rory. A big thank you to you. But I focus now on today and the present and where we're at. And as we come, I guess, to the end of the academic year, certainly here in the UK, we thought it pertinent and a good idea to bring you a student story. Rory, you met up with Ruth Watson, and she spoke about her journey. Can you give us what we'll get to take away from this?
Well, I think the big takeaway is, as Ruth so eloquently states, the changes that take place personally over the arc of a practice-based course. And we'll hear Ruth talking about how she's changed, some of the challenges that she faced when she went to do her 2-year diploma in counselling with a CPCAB accredited body. And she speaks of it with so much passion, so much love. And I'm reminded, Ken, that it's people like Ruth who are really the future of our profession. They're the people who'll be coming in, seeing the profession through fresh eyes, bringing us research, changes in the way we're working, and meeting the clients where they are. And this is what Ruth had to say. And we welcome Ruth Watson, who is a student undertaking a level 4 diploma in counselling here in the UK, and literally just up the road. Well, I say up the road. We're kind of in the north of England, aren't we, Ruth? Whereabouts in the world are you?
So I'm not too far from you on a world perspective. I'm in near Warrington in Newton Willows, so probably about half an hour from where you are.
Yeah, about half an hour. So maybe about 30 miles. Got to be careful, people breaking the speed limit. About 30 miles away, something like as the bird would fly. So you're very welcome. And just tell me where you are in the terms of your studies. Just tell me a little bit about where you are.
Yeah, so I've gone through with the CPCAB course. I'm studying in Liverpool with an agency called Stand Tall. It's a private one, not so much a college, and it's run by a lovely lady called Lindsay. And I've done my level 2 there in a small group, and then I've done my level 3, and I'm now just a few months away from completing the level 4. But because of COVID, and I've also had a baby on the level 4, so I am going to be finishing the academic side, the sort of study in end of June, and then my placement will continue and some other little bits. So getting towards the finish line. Yeah,
and sounds like quite a journey having a baby in the middle of it, and as well as coping with all the kind of other stuff that goes on in her life.
Yeah, it's been a ride, because I think ideally, if you could plan your life, I wouldn't have planned to be have a small 5-month-old baby at the end of the level 4, but life happens, doesn't it? And I'd tried to get pregnant for a while, and just thought, you know what, if I want it to happen, I've just got to go for it and see what happens. And then luckily it did, and so here we are.
Well, there we go. and what joy in the world a child is. So let's celebrate that. So how long have you been in training? I think a lot of people will be interested in how long you get in training to the point where you're nearly finishing the academic side. How long would that be?
Yeah, you put me on the spot here, testing my memory. I think I started my level 2. It would have been 2017, I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's I'm adding it up in my head. That's right. So yeah, it was 2017, and I did a kind of a fast-tracked level 2 where it was more condensed, and we did some weekends, and then went straight into the level 3, had a bit of a break, and then came on to the level 4, which is 2 years in total.
Yeah. So the sense there is it's not a very quick process, is it? It's to going into being, I want to be a counsellor, do the level 2, to where you are now, it's almost 3, nearly 4 years.
Yeah, it is a process. And I remember if someone had told me at the beginning of level 2 that I would ever be at the end of level 4, I would have found it hard to grasp, I think. It seemed like such a long time, but it really does highlight that thing about not being too focused. I think with these courses, you can't be too focused on the end of just, I want to be qualified and just want to get it all boxed off, because it really is the journey and the transformation, both personally and in your knowledge throughout that time, that you don't really notice I personally didn't notice how long it's taken to get here, because it's just kind of, there's been so much going on throughout it.
So we talk about that process. How do you think you've changed through the arc of your training? Is there anything you can say that, if you could meet the Ruth, the level 2 Ruth, what might you see as a difference, shall we say?
Oh my goodness. A lot of differences. I still remember walking in the room on my first week at level 2 and feeling just really unsure about myself and thinking, was I good enough? And I had no idea really what it was going to entail. And I think that now I'm here, I think it's been the thing that my tutor said, Lindsay said, is that, it's like a washing machine. You get tumbled around and you come out and, you could be a completely different person. And I definitely feel like it's not been a continuous feeling like that, but there's been key points. I think a lot on the level 2 is a lot of self-development and self-discovery and reflection. So I found level 2 to be really threw everything on its head. I was questioning everything in my life and really noticing all of the things that I was really afraid of and how little kind of self-worth I had. So it's been a journey for me to try and grow into my, talking about Carl Rogers, you talk about like your self-concepts and this organismic self. And I think that throughout the training, I've really noticed how far I'd maybe become detached and unfamiliar with who I really was. And I definitely feel like I've got much closer to feeling like I'm one person now. I'm not as conflicted with different masks for different things. And I think that that's been a big difference. But it definitely has rocked the boat, rocked the boat in my marriage. My husband would sometimes be like, who's going to come off this course tonight? And, he had to ride those waves with me. So it definitely impacts on your wider family and friends, I think.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're more connected with yourself, you're more congruent with yourself. But with that, those around you have had to accept the new Ruth and all that brings, I guess.
Yeah, and I've had to be in the dirt with me. I feel like I've dragged some of them into the dirt with me a bit. And I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying this, but in the middle of my course as well, my mum had some kind of realizations, and she's in her mid-70s now, but she decided that she was going to go and kind of look into like counselling and ways that could help her. So I really do think that it ripples out. And it might be something that we can't really intellectualize or understand, but it's like it's doing things that you can't see under the surface. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think you would be. Your experience would mirror my experience. I did my course nearly 20 years ago at the point of doing this podcast, and yes, it does throw a pebble into the lake, and it ripples out, and it touches all aspects of your life. I wonder what in terms of the practicalities of study, what have the challenges been there? You spoke about obviously having a child through this process, but putting the child to one side, if I could put a child to one side, what other practical challenges have you come across in your studies in terms of other things you've had to do other than study?
Well, I've worked full time throughout doing the course. So besides like family stuff, actually, sometimes when you've done a working week and you feel mentally drained, kind of pushing yourself to be like, I'm going to go and spend till 9:00 at night really going deep into stuff that is quite difficult to do after a long day. So doing it is quite, even though it's just talking, which people would say it's just talking, it can be really tiring, and you have to acknowledge that. And I think there was some people on my level 3 course that found it too much. They didn't continue because they might have been social workers in the day, for example, or jobs like that, which were very demanding, and it was too much. So I'd say that definitely from a practical point of view, balancing work life with doing it, you have to think, well, how many hours am I going to be in college for? And how many additional hours of study am I going to need to do on top of that? You've got to be willing to give up some of your, free times at the weekend or in the evenings, to kind of be completing all of the work. So there's a real time commitment, and there's a real emotional commitment to it as well, that it's not just kind of learning a skill, it's going to transform your life as well as being able to transform other people's lives.
So it's more than a way of doing, it's a way of being, as we sometimes say on the podcast.
Yeah, I totally think so, because how can you sit with somebody if you haven't sort of gone into yourself? Because you really need to do that to be able to sit there with someone and be in their dirt and be in that with them. And I think that if you've not taken the time to really work on yourself as well, then that's when things can start going awry, and you can't build that relationship with someone. Because I think throughout all the difficulties of sometimes slogging away writing an essay on legislation or looking at risk assessments and core form, all these things, which I must admit are not my favourite part of the study, I try and always think that when you're in the room and you're with someone and you're one-to-one and you have that connection and you feel like that, it's just this feeling, like that's what would keep me going with it.
Yeah, that overwhelming desire to, it feels like, be of service to someone, to help somebody, to make a difference in someone's life, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that was something that I just felt like I wasn't getting through my my other roles. Like I've worked in like creative design industry and done writing and loads of fun things. I was going to become a primary school teacher at one point. I was going to thought about becoming a yoga teacher at one point. And I think all the time that I've kind of dipped into stuff, I think the strand that I've tried to look at that's run through it all is that I've just wanted to help people and kind of connect with people and have that real, it's hard to put into words, but that feeling that I'm really living a purpose and a meaning, rather than just going and doing a job and where I'm questioning, well, what's the worth in this?
It's making your life meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I think I was looking for. I think it was Freud that said about there's the two main things in life, love and work. And I think that I always felt like I had a strong kind of family and personal life, but my work was not fulfilling and didn't feel like it gave me meaning. So
yeah, and it sounds like you found that not only in the study, but obviously in yourself. It's generated it in yourself. I've got one final question to ask you as we bring the podcast to a close. If you were to meet Ruth before the start of the courses, maybe you got a time machine, you could go back in time to 2017 and you met, I don't know how weird that would be, meeting yourself, but going back in time, what advice would you give Ruth before she walked into level 2? What wise words would you impart to her?
Oh, that's one of those questions on a podcast where you think, oh, what should I say? It's a biggie. I would just say, really, just try not to overthink it. Don't get in your head too much. Just follow the feeling that if something feels right. If doing that level 2 course, it just felt right. And just to trust the process and go with it. And when you do that, it really does mean that the time, you don't notice the time because you're learning and you're growing and just taking some time as well to really, I would say to that younger Ruth on the level 2, to really kind of take time to reflect on how far I've come and to realize that, it's a journey and the outcome isn't the important part. It's all about what I've learned along the way. And even if I didn't end up doing something career-wise with the course, just the amount of learning that it's given to me as a friend, as someone who's in a marriage and someone that's now a mum, like I feel like that's been the greatest gift for me of the last really testing 5 months is that I feel like I've got so much wisdom now and confidence in myself that I can pass on to my daughter now. So that's a real blessing. So I would hopefully be able to tell her that all those things are going to come together.
Well, on those very wise and I think poignant words, Ruth Watson, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Rory. It's been a real pleasure to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rory, for hosting that interview. A very big thank you to Ruth. I've spoken to Ruth as well. We're so very grateful for anyone who shares their journey with us. And we now move on to Focus on Supervision. This is our brand new section that we've only just slotted in towards the end of this season. And today we're going to be speaking about self-care in supervision. So from the point of view of the supervisor, looking at the practitioner, the supervisee in practice and ensuring, I guess, or reminding them of the importance of that self-care, Rory.
Yes, I would say that there are times that being a supervisor where you have to speak truths, and part of that kind of role is you may have a supervisee who's struggling, who is presenting with a lot of personal issues. And, part of being a supervisor is to talk that through and see how that might be impacting on their practice. And I know when I started my training, I started in the November of 2002 as a student in placement. And I remember my mother died in the August of 2003. And I went to my supervisor and I said, my mother died. And she said, okay, let's just talk about where you're at. And we had a real interesting conversation where she was really thoughtful of where I was at, but also she was doing her job. She was seeing if I could still carry on counselling, if I was still in a position to be able to counsel. And what we agreed was that I could carry on, but probably not take on anybody who'd had a bereavement. A recent bereavement, and I agreed to that. Went back to my agency, and they were happy with that because they had said to me, "Oh gosh, very sorry to hear about your mother's death," and they said, "I'm sure you're going to be speaking about that in supervision," and that's what I did. And for the next year, I didn't work with anybody who'd had any form of bereavement. But there are some times where I guess the supervisor's got some tough calls to make, where they can see that someone is really, really struggling in their personal lives. And quite clearly from the presentation in supervision, it's almost certainly that's going to impact on clients. And supervisors sometimes have to make some tough calls.
Yeah, very, very much so. And there are times, like in the example that you've brought there, Rory, where it is known, where it is seen. You obviously, you faced a bereavement, you would have taken that in, your supervisor would have recognized that and worked with you around that. And those are the seen elements of self-care. The unseen elements of self-care, I think, are interesting. And I'm speaking here about burnout. So burnout is a horrible place to find yourself as a practitioner. It's where your energy is gone, where your motivation is gone, where you are 100%, well, not being 100% your best, and certainly not in service of the client, because your own self-care has somehow lapsed. And the interesting thing about burnout is it is seen at the point of burnout. It is seen at the point of I can't go on anymore. I am now broken. There's almost like a progressive creeping up that is sometimes unseen to the practitioner themselves, and it can be related to the caseload. It can be related to so many things. And I think supervisors keeping an eye open, looking at how the practitioner is working, asking the right questions, delving into the right areas of practice to look out for burnout. And the interesting thing is, if you just speak to somebody a couple of weeks before burnout and ask them how they are, they'll probably say, I'm really busy, but I'm fine, because it is unseen. There was an old urban myth. The urban myth is that if you take a frog and put it in cold water and warm up the water slowly, the frog will eventually die. It will boil to death. But if you put the frog in boiling water, it'll jump out. And it's almost like the cold. Well, it is an urban myth. It's not true, but it's almost like this slow warming up it is unseen. It can creep up on you. And I think it's tricky from the point of view of a supervisor to know what to ask, to know where to look in order to kind of check the self-care of the practitioner.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of burnout being something that's not easily seen. But what is easily seen is, I think a competent supervisor would be mindful of the clients that you have and what they're presenting with. And if you have a lot of clients who are presenting with really heavy duty trauma, you may be thoughtful. And I certainly, as a supervisor, would ask, how are you? I would say to the supervisor, how are you? You seem to have a lot of clients who are talking about really heavy duty things. How is that impacting on you? How are you doing with that? And, don't forget that you can get vicarious trauma. So, if you're within any form of traumatized situation for long enough, there is a chance, it's not guaranteed, but there's a chance that you could be traumatized just by being in the presence of someone or a number of people talking about it. You can be re-traumatized if you have trauma in your own history. So you need to be very thoughtful. And I know that one of the things in supervision and talking to other supervisors, they may very well say, be thoughtful of how many clients in your client load have got really, really serious trauma, because it can be intense work. For those, of course, people are empathic, and it can impact. And I had a friend in training who got completely lost with a client. He could not get out of the client's frame of reference. It permeated his dreams, his waking days, and eventually he had to go to his supervisor, who walked him out of it and said, you're going to have to look at your client load and not take on as many people with trauma, because it's impacting on you. And it is a part of a supervisor's job. And in fact, there's a really good handout that I've created. If you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to episode 196, there is a example of how a supervisor may work with a supervisee who is maybe struggling, or maybe needs to be thoughtful of their workload.
Yeah, very, very, very much so, Rory. Thank you very much. Thank you for creating that handout. When Rory's saying go to counsellingtutor.com, that's our mother website. To find episode 196, you're going to need to just click on the podcast tab. This is this episode really that you're listening to, and you'll find it right there, and you can download it from within that page. So we're talking about that self-care. We've identified certain areas. One can be something that has happened within the supervisee's or the practitioner's life that they might bring in to supervision. The other might be the unseen elements. The other aspect we've touched on, of course, is what kind of caseload and the complexity of the presentations that are coming into supervision. And one of the areas that we recognise, and this comes off the back of us, Rory has created an amazing course. It's a clinical supervision course, an advanced certificate in clinical supervision, and it's face-to-face supervision, online working as well, and group supervision. And what is really interesting is the difference of working online. If the practitioner is working online, there are other elements of self-care to be taken into consideration, wherein face-to-face practice, a counsellor coming in with a certain caseload may feel carryable. Online, that can be very different because of just how online works. You sat in front of a screen, you've got screen fatigue, you've got other elements that come into play when working online. So I think if working online, really important that the supervisor has an understanding of what can play out in the online environment, telephone environment, the kinds of transferences that can be picked up there as well, all in service, of course, of the counsellor who is working with those clients. And then one final area from the point of view of the supervisor, looking at the supervisee and their self-care, doing kind of a health check. What is it that we can monitor here? And one of the things that we can monitor, and it comes right into when we talk about the supervision triangle, and if you want more information on that, we covered it in depth in episode 192 of the podcast. So you can go and listen to that. That restorative area of the triangle in terms of checking in with the supervisee. What is your self-care regime? What do you have in place? Do you go for walks? Do you meditate? Do you practice mindfulness? Do you journal? And that can be kind of a health indicator. Oh, I haven't had time to do any of that in these last few weeks. Could be an indicator that not looking after self-care could maybe lead on to some problems down the line. I can recognize it in myself, Rory. I've got a self-care routine that I practice on a daily basis. And there are days where I'll go, oh, I'm far too busy to do my self-care routine. Things have come up, unexpected things that I have to do. And I really, really feel it. I can feel the impact. And I would imagine with prolonged not doing what I need to do to stay well, it feels like a downhill run.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think part of a supervisor's role is to be curious to what other aspects in the supervisee's life are supporting self-care, and being very, very mindful of that. I know when I went for my first placement interview many, many, many years ago, the first question they asked me is, did I have any hobbies? And I thought, what a strange question to ask at a placement for counselling, And of course, I came to appreciate the fact that what they were interested in was, do I have a life other than being a counsellor? And I think that's really, really important. And I think if you're listening to this, it might be a sobering question to ask. Do you have anything outside your life apart from counselling? And if you don't, I think that's probably a pause for introspection, because we need to have a balanced life. We have a balanced diet, hopefully, and we need to have a balanced life. And, I think that's important. And it's certainly an important part for longevity in the work. I think that in our profession, burnout is a real possibility, just because of the material and the clients' lives that present in our therapy room. So, I think a supervisor's role really is about making sure that a supervisee is practicing healthily. And of course, as I remind people on a regular basis, self-care is an ethical imperative. It appears certainly in the BACP ethical framework. And if you're not taking self-care, the question is, are you offering the best service to your clients?
Thank you for bringing this topic, Rory. Really, really important. And if you're listening to this and you're a qualified practitioner, you have a minimum of a year's practice that has been supervised, you're a member of an ethical body, you work to an ethical framework, and you're interested in training as a supervisor, we have information on our course. You just go to counsellingtutor.com. We are all sold out at the moment, but we will be releasing some new dates in August. We'll be releasing our 2022 date list of the times that we're running our course, but you are able to join up a waiting list. We'll give you a priority email to let you know when those dates become available. So there you have it. That is our focus on supervision. Moving on now to Practice Matters, Rory, where you met up with Professor Mick Cooper to speak about goals in therapy. If I'm not mistaken, I think that Mick actually did a lecture on this, which is available in our Counsellor CPD library.
You're absolutely correct. And it's always a pleasure to meet up with Mick Cooper. He's a foremost thinker, someone who's undertaken huge amounts of research, and he's pushing forward the boundaries of therapy. He's ploughing new ground. And, for those who attend the lecture, I think that you'll see the kind of fruition of that work. And we met up to talk about goals in therapy and why they're important. And this is what he had to say.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Professor Mick Cooper, who has just delivered a fabulous lecture on goals in therapy for the Counsellor CPD library. Mick, you're so welcome. How are you doing?
I'm all right, Rory. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, likewise, Mick. I'm really interested in goals in therapy.
Yeah.
Is this a research-driven idea? Because I know that you're a researcher.
Well, I think actually it's more driven initially by theory. I guess, and funnily enough, it kind of comes from existential theory. Not that many existential therapists would like goals, but I think it really comes from the idea that as human beings, we are oriented towards the future. We've always got things that we're kind of striving towards, and it's part of our being is to move in particular directions. So I guess the idea of goals is not about creating goals so much as being able to articulate for ourselves and also in our therapeutic work with our clients where it is that they're going to, and helping them to be a bit clearer about that and to put that at the forefront of therapy. I think it also comes a bit from a social justice perspective, really, that therapy should first and foremost be orientated around what clients want from it. Not that clients always know and that they can say, but that's a pretty good starting point, rather than us as therapists saying, right, this is what your therapy is going to do, or using measures, or saying it's about reducing depression. Is actually talking to the client and saying to the client, well, where do you want this to get you to? Yeah. And clients really vary in what they want from therapy, and that seems a really good starting point to me.
Yes, it speaks about autonomy, doesn't it? It speaks about
absolutely.
autonomy.
And it's kind of an ethical, ethically, it's putting the client's wants at the forefront and their rights, as you say, their autonomy at the forefront of the therapeutic work.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Carl Rogers himself said that all behaviour is goal directed.
He did indeed. I was reading that just yesterday.
and I think sometimes we forget that. Do you think therapists? How do you think therapists take generally? I know you can't speak for all therapists, but what do you think the therapeutic community would take to really using this idea of saying to a client, so what is it you want to get out of therapy? What do you want to achieve?
Well, I know goals aren't very popular, and particularly in certain fields. I mean, I think in CBT they're very popular, and people work with goals all the time. Interpersonal therapy, lots of therapies do work with goals, solution-focused therapy. But I think within my own community, person-centered, existential, psychodynamic, often integrative, people don't like goals, and I understand why. I mean, I think goals is often seen as being about doing rather than being. It's about kind of trying to achieve something and having an end and then having an objective. And a lot of the time as therapists, what we want to do is provide a space where clients can just be, can talk about what's going on, can connect with their feelings, and rather than feeling that they've got to be doing something. And goals can feel like just one more kind of neoliberal striving towards something that is going to end up compounding clients' problems rather than making them better. So I do understand why therapists are often suspicious about it. But, going back to your point about research, Rory, the reality is that a lot of clients do want goals. I mean, it really varies, and we've got to put that up front. Clients really vary. And if we're going to be client-centered, then we need to acknowledge that some clients want goals and find them useful, and some don't, and that there's no right or wrong about it. And if a therapist comes from a position that goals aren't a good thing, then in a sense they are putting their own values and assumptions before what a client might actually want.
Yeah, absolutely, Mick. And I like the fact that you picked up on this idea that goals are almost sort of like a capitalist-driven idea of attaining something, achievement. Whereas in therapy, goals could be asking the client, I guess, just what they'd like to change, or what would make their life better.
Yeah, absolutely. And goals, if you don't like the word goals, then aims, strivings, direction. I mean, in my last book on integrating counselling and psychotherapy, I talk about directions rather than goals, because I think it's a bit of a gentler term. And I think the problems with goals is that it can be used in a very kind of performance management way, and it has been used, and a lot of the literature comes from that. So I think there's softer words about, where would you like therapy to take you? What would you like to get out of it? That I'm sure a lot of therapists at the end of the day do use in their work, and that is very, very widely used. But I think the advantage of talking about goals is that it gives us a kind of framework to explore it, to research it, to understand it more, to make some more sense of it. But if the terminology doesn't fit, people are very welcome to use different ways of thinking about it.
Yeah, and also I think that there's a danger, isn't there, that with, there's an old saying, isn't there, without a goal you can't score. And I think there could be a danger that if therapy kind of gets into this kind of mission creep of just a kind of secular discussion, that clients may not actually get the benefit of being able to say, well, I came for this and I can see that I'm changing.
As I was saying, we find that around 2/3 of clients do want goals in therapy. And they that's both at the beginning of therapy and at the end of it. A lot of clients say goals are really helpful. Why were they helpful? Well, partly just talking about goals can help clients think about what it is that they want. If they set some goals, they can also monitor how they're doing. And, we have, for instance, a goals form that can be used as a way of tracking that. It doesn't have to be used, but it's one way of doing it. And I think that what clients say is that it provides focus often. It allows them to, as you say, without goals is difficult to score. And with it allows clients just come back and say, what is it that I want to use this therapy for? We know from our research that clients do sometimes feel, particularly in more open-ended, non-directive approaches, that sometimes they feel that they're just going around in circles a bit, and that it's not really moving forward. I mean, not all clients. Some clients love that; they love the space. But for other clients, it can feel a bit circuitous, and having some sense and some reminder of where it is that they want to get to from the therapist to remind them is really appreciated.
Yes, and I can remember reading about Roger's, time at the University of Wisconsin, where he was incredibly frustrated. But one of the things that came out of that was he talked about motivation. Those clients who are motivated to make changes would almost certainly get a more benefit out of therapy, and this has been repeated, I think, in a number of researches. Does it link? Does this setting of goals link to that? Do you think client motivation?
I think partly. I mean, you're right, Rory. We know that the vast majority of change in therapy is about the client's factors like motivation, participation, involvement. I mean, we found in our research paper we did recently that clients who were positive about goals, as opposed to those who were more negative, were much more likely. I mean, phenomenally, 30 times more likely to change if clients were positive about goals. But of course, it is correlational. So, as you say, it shows that clients who are more motivated, more likely to have goals, probably change more. That doesn't necessarily mean, therefore, that setting goals with clients is going to be a good thing, because, that hasn't been shown yet. All we know from the research, I think, and be fair to say, is that for some clients, they certainly describe it as a good thing afterwards. But also some clients say that, I don't think there's many clients who say they didn't like goals. We found a few clients. More often what we found is clients saying, for instance, at the beginning, they didn't know what their goals were, and it felt a little bit premature, and they would have liked to have been asked later on in the work. So I think something with goals is that it's important to discuss it, not just kind of set goals at the beginning, but keep it as an open process of, what is it we're doing together, and what would we like to do together as an ongoing discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. A co-created relationship, and it speaks very much to what we talked about earlier in the interview, which of course is autonomy. I wonder, Mick, for people who are watching this lecture, what do you hope they'll take away from it? What do you hope that they'll take away into their practice?
Well, I hope they'll understand some of the benefits of working with goals, and also some of the limitations and some of the challenges. And that if they are interested in using goals, or if they think that using goals would be good, and I hope they take away that for some clients, setting some goals or aims or ways forward can be helpful. That they'll understand some of the principles of working well with goals, for instance, as we talked about, like keeping them fairly flexible so that they can be changed, and also to get some idea of how very concretely they can do that. So specific ways of asking clients about what they want from therapy, and then also tools that they can use to monitor that in the therapeutic work.
Well, I think that is a very concise set of takeaways, Mick. And as always, it's a pleasure to speak with you. So, Mick Cooper, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rory.
Thank you, as always, to Professor Mick Cooper, a regular here with Counselling Tutor, a regular lecturer in our Counsellor CPD library. Thank you to you, Rory, for hosting that interview and kind of bringing us the gist of what was covered in Mick's lecture. And of course, if you're listening to this and you're interested in seeing Mick's complete lecture, information on how to join the Counsellor CPD library, just go to counsellingtutor.com. It's right there on our homepage. That was episode 196, Rory.
Yes, absolutely. And as we head into summer, what a wonderful retrospective of this year. We started with Ken just giving us a retrospective and talking about how the online world has now come of age. We had an interview with student Ruth Watson, who's at the point of qualifying to be a new therapist and will be a new person in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, pushing our profession forward. In Focus on Supervision, we talked about the self-care of the supervisee and why it's really important that supervisors have a watchful eye on the self-care and how a supervisee is presenting with that. And finally, we met up with our good friend to Counselling Tutor, Professor Mick Cooper, who's delivered just a fabulous lecture on goals in therapy. And always stay grounded, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counselor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.